A retired royal guard went undercover to test his replacement, certain the younger generation couldn't uphold tradition. But when his perfect trap backfired, he discovered he was the one being evaluated all along. Now, before we continue, tell us where you're watching from in the comments. And make sure to subscribe, because tomorrow at this very same time, we're dropping another powerful Royal Guard story that you won't want to miss. Captain Gareth Bennet adjusted his civilian overcoat as he approached Windsor Castle, the familiar silhouette stirring memories of the 22 years he'd spent guarding its grounds. The crisp autumn breeze carried the scent of rain-dampened stone and polished brass, smells that had once been as familiar to him as his own reflection. 3 months into retirement, and the sensation of walking these grounds without his uniform still felt like wearing someone else's skin. "Just another tourist today," he reminded himself, pulling his cap lower as he joined the gathering crowd. His right leg ached slightly where the shrapnel had torn through muscle and bone during his final deployment. The doctors had called it career-ending. Bennet had called it merely inconvenient. Nevertheless, medical discharge had forced him to surrender his post, his routine, and his purpose. Through discreet inquiries and old connections, Bennet had learned the name of his replacement, Private Thomas Harlow. 24 years old, impeccable record, highly recommended. On paper, the perfect candidate. But papers didn't stand for 8 hours in driving rain. Papers didn't maintain composure when drunken tourists hurled insults. Papers didn't understand what it truly meant to wear the uniform. The standards aren't what they were, his former colleague Captain Reynolds had mentioned during their monthly pub meeting. These young ones, they haven't got the same respect for tradition. Treat it like any other posting. The comment had gnawed at Bennet ever since. Windsor wasn't just any posting. It was living history, an unbroken line of duty stretching back centuries. If standards were truly slipping, he couldn't simply stand by and watch. Bennet checked his watch, precisely 10 minutes before the changing of the guard. Perfect timing. He'd observe Harlow's turnout, his bearing, his discipline under the scrutiny of hundreds of eager tourists. The plan was simple: 3 days of anonymous observation, followed by a series of staged tests with the help of his old friend, Major Ashford. Nothing dangerous or extreme, but enough to evaluate whether Harlow truly deserved to stand where Bennet once stood. "Time to see what you're made of, Private Harlow," Bennet murmured as he merged with the crowd gathering for the ceremonial changing of the guard. The ceremony proceeded with clockwork precision. Bennet watched from behind his camera, using it as both prop and shield as he scrutinized every movement. Private Harlow marched into position with textbook precision, his scarlet tunic and bearskin cap immaculate against the ancient stone backdrop of Windsor Castle. The crowd around Bennet murmured appreciatively, cameras clicking in rapid succession. "Look at how still they stand," a woman with an American accent whispered to her companion. "I couldn't do that for 5 minutes, let alone hours." Bennet's expert eye caught what others missed. Harlow's left glove showed the faintest shadow where it had been recently cleaned of a stain. His rifle placement was perfect, but perhaps a fraction slower than regulation during the ceremonial exchange. The angle of his bearskin cap was precise to the degree Bennet himself had always insisted upon. Small details, invisible to tourists, but glaring to someone who had lived inside that uniform for over 2 decades. Adequate, Bennet thought, his internal assessment more grudging than he'd intended. But there's a difference between performing the motions and embodying the tradition. A young boy, no more than 7, broke away from his parents and ran toward Harlow, waving excitedly. Bennet tensed, watching for Harlow's reaction. The private's eyes remained fixed forward, not even a flicker of acknowledgement crossing his features as the child was gently retrieved by an embarrassed father. "Sorry about that," the father muttered, though Bennet wasn't sure if the apology was directed at the guard or the surrounding tourists. "They're not actually statues, you know," an elderly man commented nearby. "These lads have all served in combat. More than just pretty uniforms, these boys." Bennett glanced at the speaker, noting the regimental tie and the subtle way he stood. Military bearing never truly leaves a man. Their eyes met briefly, a moment of silent recognition passing between them. "Served yourself?" the man asked quietly. 22 years, Bennett replied, his voice equally low. "Queen's Guard." The man nodded respectfully. "Thought as much. You've got the look. Still evaluating your replacement, I see." His eyes twinkled with knowing amusement. Bennett's surprise must have shown, despite his attempts to conceal it. "Did the same thing myself 30 years ago," the elderly veteran explained. "Hard to let go, isn't it? Wondering if the next generation will uphold what you dedicated your life to." Bennett offered a non-committal grunt, uncomfortable with how easily his intentions had been read. He shifted his attention back to Harlow, who remained perfectly motionless as a group of teenage tourists posed for photographs nearby. "He seems competent enough," Bennett admitted reluctantly. "But you're not convinced," the veteran finished for him. "The uniform deserves more than competence," Bennett replied. "It deserves devotion." As the crowd shifted, Bennett moved with it, positioning himself at different angles to observe Harlow more comprehensively. The private's posture remained impeccable, his gaze unwavering despite the circus of tourism swirling around him. Grudgingly, Bennett acknowledged that the superficial elements were all in place. But the true test of a guard wasn't in maintaining appearances when everything went according to plan. It was in the response when things went wrong. The following morning dawned grey and drizzling, the kind of persistent English rain that seemed to seep directly into the bones. Perfect, Bennett thought. Weather had always been the first test of a guard's mettle. Bennett spotted Major Ashford immediately among the thinner Tuesday crowd. Despite his civilian clothes, Ashford carried himself with unmistakable military bearing, his silver hair cropped close in the same style he'd worn for 40 years of service. At 65, Ashford still maintained the physique of a man who considered military standards a lifelong commitment, not just a professional requirement. They exchanged the briefest of nods before taking positions at opposite ends of the visitor area. Private Harlow stood at attention, water beading on his uniform like liquid glass. If the discomfort of wet wool and the weight of a sodden bearskin cap bothered him, it didn't show in his posture or expression. Bennett knew from experience how the water would be seeping through to skin by now, how the weight of the uniform would be testing every muscle. "Let's see how you handle a bit of pressure, lad," Bennett murmured, as Ashford began the approach they'd planned the previous evening. "Impressive bit of kit you've got there," Ashford called out, his voice carrying across the courtyard. "Suppose it must get heavy after a while, eh? That rifle real or just for show?" The rifle question, a classic provocation. Bennett watched intently, noting how Harlow's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but his stance remained unchanged. "Do they let you fellows take bathroom breaks, or do you just have to hold it?" Ashford continued, his tone jovial but increasingly intrusive. He took another step closer. "Must say, I don't envy you in this weather. Like standing in a cold shower in a fancy dress costume, I'd imagine." A young couple nearby exchanged uncomfortable glances, the woman whispering something to her partner. Bennett recognized the familiar dynamic. Tourists often felt collective embarrassment when one of their number behaved poorly, as though they shared responsibility. "You know, my tax pounds pay your salary," Ashford pressed on, now standing close enough that a palace attendant had begun moving in their direction. "Seems like the least you could do is acknowledge a friendly hello, or perhaps a little song and dance." He chuckled at his own joke. Bennett watched Harlow's eyes closely. The true measure of a guard wasn't in maintaining stillness, but in knowing exactly when that stillness should be broken. In the private's gaze, he detected not irritation or discomfort, but calm assessment, the look of a man measuring a potential threat while remaining fully in control of his response. The palace attendant arrived at Ashford's side. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to step back behind the rope line." "Just having a friendly chat with our granite-faced friend here," Ashford protested good-naturedly. Nevertheless, sir, those are the rules. The guards are on active duty. Ashford allowed himself to be guided back, but not before delivering his final test. A deliberate, though not dangerous, violation of protocol. He reached out as if to touch the tassels on Harlow's uniform. The reaction was immediate but measured. Harlow shifted his rifle position in the formal warning stance, a movement so precise it seemed part of a ceremony rather than a response to provocation. His voice, when it came, carried the perfect blend of authority and restraint. "Step back, sir." 3 words, delivered with such command that even Ashford, a decorated major, found himself complying instinctively. The small crowd of onlookers went silent, cameras lowering as they witnessed this rare break in the guard's stoic performance. The attendant seized the opportunity to usher Ashford further back, and the moment passed without escalation. Bennett felt an unexpected flicker of approval. Harlow had followed protocol exactly. No premature reaction, no excessive response, no loss of composure. When intervention became necessary, it was executed with textbook precision. "Well?" Ashford asked later, as they met at a cafe several streets away from the castle. "He passed your little test," Bennett admitted, warming his hands around a mug of strong tea. "With flying colours, I'd say," Ashford corrected. "The lad's got proper control. Didn't let me rattle him, but didn't let me cross the line either." Bennett nodded reluctantly. One test doesn't make a guardsman. "No," Ashford agreed, eyeing his old friend with knowing amusement. "But you're already less certain of your judgment, aren't you?" Bennett didn't answer, but the slight frown creasing his brow was answer enough. Private Harlow had surprised him today, not with his failures, but with his competence. Tomorrow would require different tactics. Wednesday afternoon found Bennett following Private Harlow at a discreet distance as the young guardsman, now in civilian clothes, made his way through the streets of Windsor. Bennett had expected him to head for the local pub, or perhaps his quarters, the natural destinations after a demanding shift. Instead, Harlow boarded a local bus heading toward the outskirts of town. 20 minutes later, Bennett watched with curiosity as Harlow entered the gates of Oakwood Military Rehabilitation Centre, a facility Bennett knew well from his own recovery. What business could the young guard have there? Making a quick decision, Bennett followed, using his veteran status to gain entry without raising suspicion. The reception area was warm and institutional, decorated with regimental flags and photographs of royal visits. The sound of laughter guided Bennett down the corridor. He paused at the doorway, staying partially hidden as he surveyed the room. Private Harlow, still ramrod straight despite his casual clothes, was seated among a group of wounded veterans. Some were in wheelchairs, others with visible prosthetics, or the 1,000-yard stare of those battling invisible wounds. Harlow appeared to be leading some kind of workshop, his hands moving deftly as he demonstrated something to the small group. "That's it, exactly," Harlow was saying to a young man struggling with a prosthetic arm. "Small movements first, then build up the complexity. Just like drill exercises, master the basics before attempting the flourish." Bennett edged closer, careful to remain unnoticed. The workshop, he now realized, involved woodworking. Miniature carved figures were taking shape under the veteran's hands. Therapeutic craftwork, common in rehabilitation settings. "When I first started guard duty," Harlow continued, "my shoulders would knot up something terrible after standing still for hours. Found that these small carving movements were perfect for rebuilding dexterity without overstraining. Plus," he added with a smile that transformed his serious face, "they give you something to focus on, besides how much your feet hurt." Quiet laughter rippled through the group. There was an easy camaraderie here, Bennett noted with surprise. This wasn't Harlow's first visit. "Thomas has been coming every Wednesday for nearly 8 months now," a voice said quietly beside Bennett. He turned to find a nurse in her 50s standing nearby. "One of our most dedicated volunteers. You're welcome to join the session if you'd like." "I'm just Observing, Bennett replied, unsure how to explain his presence without revealing his true purpose. Well, he's worth observing, the nurse said with obvious approval. Started with just teaching drill techniques to help with physical therapy, but it's evolved into much more. The men respect him. He doesn't just talk the talk. He's a Queen's Guard, Bennett said, as if this explained the respect. Yes, but that's not why they listen to him, the nurse corrected gently. They listen because he listens to them first. Treats them like soldiers, not patients, makes all the difference. He requested this assignment specifically, you know, the nurse added. Most volunteers just take whatever slot is available, but Thomas insisted on Wednesdays, even though it means coming straight from his guard shift without a break. Bennett felt something shift in his assessment of the young guardsman. This wasn't the behaviour of someone who viewed his uniform as merely a job. This was dedication that extended beyond duty hours, beyond what was required or expected. Thursday brought clear skies and larger crowds to Windsor Castle. The morning passed uneventfully until a sudden commotion erupted near the rope barrier. A crowd gathered around someone on the ground, voices rising in concern. From his position, Bennett could see an elderly man had collapsed, his wife kneeling beside him in obvious distress. "Someone call an ambulance!" The cry rose above the general murmur. Bennett instinctively moved toward the scene, then froze, watching as Harlow faced a guardsman's most difficult decision: when to break protocol. For 3 eternal seconds, Harlow remained at his post, eyes fixed ahead as protocol demanded. Then, with deliberate movements that somehow maintained the dignity of his position, Harlow stepped forward. "Stand aside, please." The crowd parted automatically, responding to the command in his tone. Harlow knelt beside the fallen man, checking vital signs with practiced efficiency. "Sir, can you hear me?" "He has a heart condition," the man's wife explained, her voice trembling. "His medication, I can't find it." "Has anyone called emergency services?" Harlow asked, voice clear and controlled. "On their way," someone in the crowd confirmed. Bennett watched as Harlow efficiently loosened the man's collar and positioned him properly. These weren't just basic first aid skills. This was the confident response of someone with emergency medical training. A palace security officer arrived with medical equipment and knelt beside Harlow. They worked in tandem until the paramedics arrived. Only when the paramedics had taken over completely did Harlow stand, brush down his uniform, and prepare to return to his post. The crowd spontaneously parted to create a path, several people nodding in acknowledgement as he passed. Before resuming his position, Harlow exchanged brief words with a senior guard who had arrived. "Necessary intervention, sir," Harlow was saying. "Full report will follow." With a precise turn, Harlow returned to his post, resuming his stance as if the interruption had never occurred. Bennett felt his final reservations crumbling. Harlow had made the perfect call, maintaining protocol until human need demanded otherwise, then acting with confidence and returning to duty without fanfare. His actions had honoured, rather than diminished, the uniform. As the emergency vehicles pulled away and the normal activities resumed, Bennett made his decision. It was time to meet Private Thomas Harlow face to face. The Royal Oak pub sat tucked away on a quiet side street, far enough from Windsor Castle to avoid the tourist crowds. Bennett arrived early, securing a corner table with a clear view of the entrance. At precisely 7 o'clock, Private Harlow entered, now dressed in civilian clothes that nonetheless carried the crisp appearance of a man accustomed to military standards. "Captain Bennett," he said, extending his hand, "I wondered when you'd make your introduction." Bennett's eyebrows rose slightly as they shook hands. "You know who I am." "The man whose position I assumed. The decorated captain with 22 years of service who's been observing me for the past 3 days. Harlow's tone held respect, but no deference. "Yes, sir. I know exactly who you are." "Your response during yesterday's medical emergency was well handled," Bennett began. "Where did you learn those skills?" 2 tours in Afghanistan, sir. Combat medic attached to our forward unit before applying to the Queen's Guard." Harlow's eyes held Bennett's without wavering. Lost 3 good men because we couldn't reach them in time. Promised myself I'd never again stand by when I could act. And the rehabilitation centre, that's not standard duty for guardsmen. My younger brother lost his left leg above the knee at Helmand Province. The centre helped him regain not just mobility, but purpose. It's a debt I can never fully repay, but I try. The waitress returned with their drinks, providing a moment's pause in the conversation. Bennett studied Harlow across the rim of his glass, seeing him with new eyes. Not as a replacement to be tested, but as a continuation of the same lineage of service and sacrifice. Why the Queen's Guard, Harlow? With your combat experience and medical training, you could have pursued numerous military paths. My grandfather stood guard at Buckingham Palace during the Blitz, refused to abandon his post even as bombs fell on London. My father served 16 years in the same position. His voice took on a quality Bennett recognized, the tone of someone speaking about something sacred. When I wear that uniform, I'm not just representing the crown or the military. I'm honoring a family tradition of service that spans generations. The uniform means that much to you. With respect, sir, the uniform is just cloth and brass, Harlow replied. It's what it represents that matters. Discipline, dedication, the willingness to stand fast when others cannot or will not. He leaned forward slightly. You know as well as I do, Captain. Most days nothing happens. We stand, tourists take pictures, life goes on, but we stand ready nonetheless, because that readiness itself has meaning. I came to test you, Bennett admitted finally, to assure myself that my replacement was worthy of the post. I know, sir, Harlow replied simply. I would have done the same. Bennett's gaze sharpened. You knew I was testing you all along. Since the first day, Harlow confirmed. The way you positioned yourself at different angles, your focused observation of protocol details, the conversation with the elderly veteran who recognized you, all consistent with surveillance rather than tourism. And Major Ashford's performance, while convincing to civilians, contained certain phrases only someone with military background would select for provocation. Yet you didn't confront me or report the harassment. Confrontation wasn't necessary. As for reporting Major Ashford, his test, while uncomfortable, remained within boundaries I could handle professionally. Escalating would have been an overreaction. This measured response impressed Bennett more than any practiced maneuver could have. The judgment to know when action was warranted and when restraint served better, that couldn't be taught in training, only learned through experience and character. You let me continue my evaluation, Bennett realized, knowing I was judging your worthiness. I welcomed it, Harlow replied simply. Your reputation precedes you, Captain. When I learned whose position I would be filling, I studied your record extensively. If anyone had the right to evaluate my performance, it was you. And did I pass your evaluation, Private Harlow? The question emerged with unexpected lightness. Your dedication to standards is commendable, sir. Your concern for the position's integrity, admirable. He hesitated, then added, but your assumption that younger generations can't match your commitment to tradition, that merits reconsideration. The directness of the criticism struck Bennett with the force of truth. How easily he had fallen into the trap of believing that tradition belonged exclusively to those who had upheld it longest, rather than to all who upheld it well. When we make the uniform about ourselves, our pride, our legacy, our recognition, we miss its true purpose, Harlow continued. The bearskin cap and scarlet tunic existed before us and will continue after we're gone. We're not owners of tradition, only its temporary custodians. I came to test whether you deserved my position, Bennett admitted. I never considered that perhaps the position was never mine to bestow. The position belongs to duty itself, Harlow agreed quietly. We simply take our turn standing in its place. Bennett found himself nodding slowly, recognizing wisdom that transcended rank and age. In their corner of the pub, a deeper understanding was taking shape. He saw in Harlow not just a replacement, but a continuation, different in person but identical in purpose. "I owe you an apology, Private," Bennett said finally. "I judged based on assumptions rather than evidence, the very behaviour I've spent a career advising others against." "No apology needed, sir. Concern for standards isn't something that requires forgiveness." Harlow's steady gaze held Bennett's. "But perhaps there's something more valuable we could exchange than apologies or judgment." "And what might that be?" "Experience and perspective," Harlow replied. "Your 2 decades of knowledge, the unwritten protocols, the handling of unusual situations, the history behind certain traditions, these aren't in any training manual. And in return, perhaps I could offer reassurance. The certainty that what you helped build and maintain isn't ending with your departure. That the standards you uphold continue through those who follow." In that moment, Bennett recognized what had been troubling him since his retirement. Not doubt about Harlow's capabilities, but fear that his own years of service would be forgotten, that the traditions he'd preserved would fade without his vigilance. "I believe," Bennett said slowly, "we have the basis for a fair exchange, Private Harlow." 3 weeks later, Bennett stood among the tourists at Windsor Castle, watching the changing of the guard with different eyes. Private Harlow marched into position with the same precision Bennett had first observed, but now he saw the purpose behind the performance, the person within the uniform. Their conversations had continued over several evenings, not as superior and subordinate, but as guardians of the same tradition separated only by time. Bennett had shared the unwritten history of their post, the subtle signals passed between guards, the techniques for maintaining concentration during 8-hour shifts, the significance behind ceremonial movements most tourists mistook for mere pageantry. Harlow, in turn, had introduced Bennett to other young guards, each bringing their own strengths to the ancient tradition. Former combat engineers who understood the palace security systems at a technical level Bennett never had. Linguists who could detect security threats in a dozen languages. Veterans of modern conflicts who applied lessons from asymmetrical warfare to ceremonial security protocols. "Quite something, isn't it?" a voice said beside him. Bennett turned to find Major Ashford, dressed in civilian clothes but standing with unmistakable military bearing. "The changing of the guard. I've seen it a few thousand times," Bennett replied dryly. "Not the ceremony," Ashford corrected. "The changing of the guard in a larger sense. Your acceptance of it." He studied his friend's face. "You seem at peace with your replacement." Bennett watched as Harlow assumed his position, stance perfect, gaze forward, the very image of disciplined vigilance. "He's not my replacement," he said quietly. "He's my successor. There's a difference." Ashford nodded, understanding the distinction. Replacement suggests something lost. Succession implies something preserved and passed forward. "Precisely." Bennett's hand moved unconsciously to his leg. "I mistook the uniform for the duty, as if hanging up one meant abandoning the other." The previous evening, Harlow had invited him to consider a new role, not as an anonymous observer or retired veteran, but as a bridge between the public and the tradition they admired but often misunderstood. The Military History Department has been requesting assistance with their public education program, Harlow had explained. Someone who can speak to visitors about the true purpose behind the ceremonial aspects, the actual training and requirements of the Guard. Who better than a captain with 22 years of distinguished service? The idea had taken root immediately, a way to continue serving the tradition he loved while acknowledging his changed circumstances. Not standing guard physically, but protecting the meaning behind the position. "He's a good man, your Harlow," Ashford commented, following Bennett's gaze. "Different from our generation in some ways, but the core, that hasn't changed." "The uniform changes slightly with each era," Bennett agreed. "New materials, subtle adjustments to design, but its purpose remains constant. Perhaps the same is true of those who wear it." As they turned to leave, Bennett cast one final glance at Private Harlow. The young guard maintained his forward gaze, the perfect image of ceremonial discipline, yet Bennett now knew the depths behind that stance. The combat experience, the volunteer work, the family legacy of service, all invisible beneath the scarlet tunic, but essential to its true meaning. "Ready for your first tour group tomorrow?" Ashford asked as they walked away. Bennett nodded, feeling a renewed sense of purpose. "The tradition continues," he said simply, "just in a different uniform." Have you ever misjudged someone from a younger generation, only to discover they upheld the same values you cherished? What traditions do you think are most important to preserve across generations? Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and press the bell icon to never miss our uploads. Share with someone who appreciates stories of tradition and respect. Watch our previous videos appearing on your screen right now. See you tomorrow, same time, with a brand new video.